The little double beep of the voicemail box cut through the quiet like someone tapping the rim of a glass. It was a familiar sound, the same impatient double note my father made in conversation when he wanted to move on. I stood in the kitchen with the garage door's rain slap in my ears and his mug, half dry and stained at the bottom, on the counter. The smell of old coffee and motor oil folded into the air like a memory. My name is Ethan Marshall. My father was Robert James Marshall. He died 2 weeks before I found the password. I tell you that crisply because the opening needs to be small. 2 sentences, then the thing that sets everything in motion. A sound I knew too well. Late night rain, and a sticky note with 4 numbers tucked inside his nightstand. You wanted a sound-led freeze, so there it is. A beep I know like a punctuation mark, and a kitchen that still smelled of him. After that, it was all elbow grease and questions. We handled the funeral like people who do practical grief. Measured, polite, checklist-driven. Aunt Diane mixed up the poems and apologized like it was an awkward errand. Family hugged me with that peculiar adult gentleness, the kind that checks for intactness rather than offers comfort. I came home and made a list in the kitchen, the way you make a grocery list to convince yourself of control. Probate, mail, cancel accounts, clear out the house. Clearing out the house proved to be the cruelest, slowest kind of work. You tell yourself you'll sit and remember. That lasted until the first drawer. I worked methodically. Top drawer of the nightstand, then the second, then the third. Socks folded tight, tax returns in a shoebox, an old spiral notebook with penciled appointments, and behind a stack of car insurance brochures, a small yellow sticky note, VMPW 4321. His handwriting, big, careful, slanted in that way he had when he wanted to be precise. Claire, my sister, found me rifling the study before I even got to the basement. She sat on the kitchen floor like she was waiting for a verdict, fingers worrying at the rim of a mug. She always worried the rims of mugs when she was deciding how to say something. She used to bite her thumbnail when she was a kid, and the habit stayed tucked under jackets and sweaters when she was nervous. "You checked his desk?" she asked without looking up. "Top drawer," I said. I kept my voice steady because voices feel like contracts in these moments. "I found this." She watched the sticky note the way someone watches a loose tooth. "Did you tell Mom's lawyer?" she asked, because logistics are what she does. Spreadsheets, phone calls, the tidy end of grief. I wanted tidy. I wanted to box the past and put it in the attic. Instead, I dialed the carrier from his landline, because that's how you get started in the modern world. Accounts, numbers, bureaucracy. The woman on the other end asked for the account number and billing zip. I read things off, while Claire flipped through a funeral pamphlet and the television in the living room clacked static into the room. She pressed the toe of her boot into the floor, the way she does when she's impatient. They sent a reset. I typed the temporary code into the old phone, heart thudding because the simple act of reading numbers felt like reaching for someone. "You have new messages," the system said. 28 messages. The first dozen were hospice calls, appointment reminders, me and Claire leaving our voices apologetic and clipped. Then there were 4 that made my stomach drop because of a single line in the header. Timestamps after his death. 2 days, 4 days, 3 hours after the coroner's recorded time. You do the sensible things first, because the sensible things are comforting. It's a glitch, a forwarding problem, a carrier error. I pressed play. His voice came through narrow and familiar. "Hey, it's Rob," he said, and there was that little stop in his breath, the same catch he had when he ran out of words. He said, "Call me when you can." then folded the sentence into a small sound like paper being closed. The recording quality was thin, like the microphone was behind glass. That voice wasn't supposed to exist after his death. I called the hospital because bizarre things sometimes have a human explanation. "We don't queue outgoing calls for patients," the woman there said, like a script with comfort built into it. That answer didn't land. It pushed the problem further into my hands. Claire guest memorial services. I'd never heard of scheduled outgoing calls. But the internet, for better or worse, has an answer for everything. I went back to the messages. One of them had a name. Not my name. Not Claire's. "Maya," my father said, as if the name fit into the sentence like a key. I Googled the number embedded in the message because that's what people do. You expect to find a social profile, a face, a trace. The number rang. On the third ring, a woman answered with the same hesitant cadence as the voice on the tape. "Hello?" "This is going to sound strange," I said. "My name is Ethan Marshall. My father, Robert Marshall, used to call this number." A pause. "Rob?" she said. The audio in my head nailed itself to the word. "He used to call every Sunday at 7, she said. "He'd talk and talk." Her name was Maya Alvarez, and she had the kind of voice that held weathered patience, a porch-level voice. She said he'd been calling for months and then stopped. She hadn't known he died until she read an obituary. Then she said something small and strange. "He told me if anything happened, I'd know where to find him." There's an uglier, quieter kind of betrayal than infidelity, and sometimes it's simply the withholding of context. My father had always been a private man, not hostile, just tidy in his omissions. He preferred small kindnesses, fixing a lawnmower, bringing sunflower seeds, over messy conversations. To me, that muffling felt like a deliberate choice. I drove to Tennessee that weekend because following a number feels like doing something useful. I packed a duffel, gaslight blinking at half, checked the tire pressure with a quick thump, and left the house with the sticky note folded into my wallet. The long drive smelled like diesel and coffee. I listened to talk radio and reinforced the timeline in my head like a litany. Maya's porch was flaking paint and an old porch light that hummed. She opened the door with her hand on the jamb, considering whether to let a stranger in. She brought out coffee in paper cups and told me the story the way people tell weather. Simple facts, no drama. He'd fixed her mower, come back with seeds, and started calling on Sundays. He talked about small things. He told her he had a son. Once she said he'd joked about being ashamed. He'd used "I'm a coward" as shorthand for not wanting to complicate our lives. That line landed like a pebble in my shoe. My immediate thought was pragmatic. Find out if he'd scheduled the calls. The practical steps are grounding. Match timestamps, get call logs, ask the carrier for records. I called the carrier again, asked for logs for billing, and they confirmed outgoing calls after his death. Then it was paperwork, death certificates, a trip back to the funeral home, a polite director with a face like he'd seen this kind of thing before and wanted to keep his hands clean. At night, I sat at the kitchen table with the phone and speaker, replaying messages until audio artifacts began to sound like memory. One message had background noises, a car door, a low laugh, a woman's voice answering, "Rob? No, you can't be. Rob, it's been months." The oddness became a map. Outgoing calls recorded, a service in the middle, timestamps that didn't add up. I typed numbers, scribbled notes, and felt that helpless, furious curiosity that comes when a familiar interior rearranges itself into something foreign. I found an email linked to his carrier account and tried password resets. Sometimes being stubborn pays. An old grocery receipt with an email on it cracked open one login. Inside the inbox was a folder labeled Maya, and in it, the casual, neighborly emails that made the whole thing feel more human than scandalous. The mower started. The porch light is out. Small fragments of life. Then one email had a voice file attached. I listened with my palms on the desk, like I could hold it steady. He said things on that file with a small, rehearsed urgency. If I can't find courage, this will do it. If I can't say it, this will be the last of me. He laughed in the exact embarrassed way he always did when admitting something petty. That line, "This will be the last of me," sat in my chest like a stone. Was it scheduled? Or was someone else doing this with his credentials? The carrier produced logs with timestamps and IP addresses and a maze that read like legalese. There was a pattern. Some calls were manual. Others routed through a third-party server in a neighboring state tied to a scheduling service. The scheduler had an API key connected to the same email in my father's account. The last upload to the scheduler was dated the day before he died. A systems admin named Aaron met me in a modest office with a printer that jammed twice and a pot of coffee that smelled like motor oil. He showed me the delivery pipeline: user upload, scheduler, outbound gateway, destination. He explained, patient as someone reading logs for a living, that a user could upload files, set delivery rules, and let the machine do the rest. The interface was blunt. For Maya, last wave sat in the scheduler like a relic ready to be sent. When I asked if someone else could have done it, he said yes, anyone with the email or access to the account. But the record showed uploads from an IP that matched Robert Marshall's home network in the week before his death. That tightened things into two options. My father set this up, or someone with access set it up for him. Either way, it looked intentional. I chased the payments. The scheduler charged a card ending in 2047 on the 12th of each month. The credit union wanted paperwork and patience, a lesson for anyone who has ever tried to move mountains while they're grieving. And the teller had a voice like a locked file cabinet until I signed forms and was properly authorized. When the ledger showed a final charge for a premium scheduling plan 2 days before his death, the smallness of the detail cut. Premium meant priority drops, daily deliveries. Whatever he had planned was meant to persist. Maya had a shoebox of things he'd given her: blurry Polaroids, handwritten lists, a bent key, packets of sunflower seeds. One Polaroid had the back scribbled, "For when I can't say it." A courier slip in my father's record showed a package sent to a P.O. box in Maya's town, signed by M.A., and the courier confirmed the sender as R. Marshall. It was the kind of tiny, boring confirmation that starts to feel heavy. The cassette from the attic, labeled Maya July, Maya Aug, Maya Last, hissed and gave up his voice when I put it into a player. He sounded unsteady in the analog tape, the way people did when they were practicing courage alone. He spoke about regret in small doses and about trying to do what he could where he could. The cassette and the digital files dovetailed into the portrait of a man who had quietly built a second, spare life out of humble acts: fixing a mower, sending $300 to keep the lights on at somebody's house, dropping off seed packets and little repairs. Claire and I argued in the kitchen, like siblings do, legs tucked under us on the linoleum floor. Claire wanted to tuck the whole thing away. She always has the protector instinct. Don't make a story bigger than it needs to be, she says. She smooths problems over with paperwork and favors and that little nail-biting thing I can see twitching at her thumbnail when she's afraid. Maybe he was ashamed, she said. Maybe he was trying to protect us from something he thought would make us resent him. Or He thought he could patch things from the outside, Jewel, I said. The word coward rose in me like bile, and I hardened my jaw until it hurt. I almost said he had no right, then realized that anger is often substitute work for grief. I almost kept the scheduler active to listen for a while longer. Instead, I exported the audio, archived the files, and left the interface open like a wound. I went back to Tennessee because humans like to meet the edges of their suspicions in person. Maya opened her door without the performance of politeness. She was practical and gentle in ways the telephone can't convey. She told me he'd called every Sunday at 7 for months. She told me he'd say small, concrete things. The seeds took, or the plows bearing squeaked, and then fall silent, like conversation was practice for something. She handed me a letter he'd written her 2 months before he died. If I'm brave enough, I'll tell Ethan in person. If not, forgive me for trying by other means, it read in his uneven script. That phrase, forgive me for trying by other means, is the hinge of most of this. It sounded like an attempt at atonement and like a dodge. On paper, it was romantic. In my mouth, it tasted like responsible anger. I kept thinking through little internal logic steps to steady myself. First instinct, delete the files and preserve privacy. Doubt, what if these documents mattered to the people he helped? Final choice, archive and offer access to those directly affected. We met Maya's sister at a diner. She accepted the anonymous aid quietly, like someone who had learned not to ask too many questions. She told us the payments had kept their lights on a month they were at the end of everything. Seeing that, the direct, small relief, rearranged something in me. Here was proof that his secret deeds were not all performative. They had tangible outcomes. It didn't erase the past, but it complicated the ledger I'd been building in my head. Practicalities 8 days, more phone calls to the carrier, time at the credit union, paperwork for records, money and time-shaped grief in ugly ways. You can't call off a bank's bureaucracy because your heart hurts. That friction grounded the whole thing in mundane reality. Receipts, signatures, deadlines, a motel bed pressed with the smell of cigarette smoke on the second night I drove back and forth. Aaron, the sysadmin, explained the scheduler like a machine with no conscience. It's designed for living wills and memorial drops, he said. It lets you set messages to go out at certain times. It doesn't judge. He fiddled with a mouse that had lost its coating and showed me upload logs stamped with my father's time and IP. The last file upload was dated the day before he died. You think he chose this? I asked. He shrugged. Either he uploaded it himself or someone with access did. The machine won't care which. Anger bled into a softer thing when I replayed those old answering machine messages from years ago. 15-year-old me on the tape, telling Dad about school, his voice thick with pride and fatigue. In that voice, there was both absence and presence. A man who could be present, but often chose not to be. That doubled image made the idea of him setting up a scheduler feel like a complicated attempt at repair, not a clean confession. We talked about what to do with the archive. Claire wanted it private. She worried the town would crown him a noble absentee. I wanted the mess to be known in small circles, the way people really are, messy, guilty, sometimes trying. We compromised. We created a private folder for the family and for the direct recipients, preserved the files, and refused the temptation to turn it into a story for the paper. One rainy afternoon, an envelope arrived at our house. No return address, a single photograph folded in half. Dad and Maya at a community picnic, his arm awkwardly around her shoulder, like a man trying to be casual about being kind. On the back he'd scrawled, "For Ethan," so you know he was trying. The photo didn't make everything okay. It made me ache in new directions. Months passed. I cataloged, Claire labeled boxes We kept the accounts in order and let the small kindnesses live in a private folder. I met with a counselor who specialized in family estrangement on Claire's insistence. The sessions helped me name things without letting the name flatten the feeling. The counselor said something I repeated to myself when anger rose. Atonement is not the same as repair. He was attempting the first. Repair needs you to be present for the other person's hurt. Maya and I spoke sometimes, like two adults who had overlapping claims on a man who had been both absent and generous in ways that mattered. She told me stories, how he'd be scared of hospitals, how he'd leave notes on her fridge, how he would laugh like a kid when seeds sprouted. Those details made him more fully human in the way a handful of mud makes a statue look less perfect and more alive. Claire and I wrote a short letter to the small church group where he'd been a loose member. We didn't ask them to canonize him. We asked them only for private prayers that would hold both his absences and his attempts, his harm, and his small reparations. It felt like the right, quiet thing. A reporter called once, thirsty for the story of the secret benefactor. I refused. There's a difference between truth and spectacle, and I didn't want grief to be a headline. I told the reporter, briefly and bluntly, that my father had been complicated, sometimes cruel by omission, sometimes unexpectedly kind. The reporter moved on. The town spun. Time does something with memory. It loosens the edges of outrage enough that gratitude can stand beside it without being swallowed. I still replay the messages sometimes when the house is empty. He sounds small and ridiculous sometimes, funny and stubborn, apologetic and embarrassed. He isn't a saint. He's not even a hero. He was my father who, in the end, tried to fix some things the only way he could think to. I keep the cassette and the digital files in a drawer. Claire keeps some receipts in an envelope labeled charity. We visit Maya on occasion. She waters the sunflower seeds one of his friends planted, and she laughs at a joke Dad used to tell about the mailbox that every summer gets run over. The archive is not an altar. It is a collection of moments, some hollow, some humane, all true to the man who left them. I reopened his study, and my chest tightened in a way that felt physical, like a hand at the base of my sternum. The wall calendar under his smiling barbecue photo still stopped in July. He'd always cross days off, habitually, as if the crossing were a way of holding time accountable. Finding it frozen like that felt like finding a shirt still warm on the chair, evidence of a plan interrupted. I mapped out what I had, like a man sketching a renovation. Timelines in ballpoint on yellow legal pads, names and numbers circled, little arrows that meant follow-up. The email inbox with the Maya folder. The cassette labeled Maya July, Maya Aug, Maya Last. The carrier logs. The courier receipt signed M.A. I taped the sticky note with the voicemail password beside the legal pad like a talisman. The email thread in his account was tidy in the way of someone who kept two lives separated by habit rather than cruelty. It started with small neighborly notes and folded into arrangements. Meet by the river at dawn. Bring the seeds. The attachment in one of his emails, a voice file, threw me. He sounded older, as if the microphone absorbed the weight of a man rehearsing apologies in an empty kitchen. If I can't find courage, he said, this will do it. If I can't tell her, this will be the last of me. That line felt like proof that he either decided to plan a message or directed someone else to do it. The carrier logs were thinly bureaucratic. IP addresses, timestamps, manual versus automated tags. The third-party scheduler had an API key connected to his email. The final upload was dated the day before his recorded death. I felt the odd tightness of being close to something without quite being there yet. The system's admin, Aaron, took me into a small glass-fronted office that hummed with aging air conditioning and a printer that jammed and spat papers the way some people spit out facts when nervous. He walked me through the path from upload to delivery and showed me the folder names, the creation dates, the logs labeled Final Message, Rob, year 924.wave. He explained how the schedule system could keep sending messages until someone canceled it. He was methodical, tugging at the hem of his sleeve like someone who always had a small fidget. "You can pull the files," he said, "but you'll need authorization." Bureaucracy is a strange comfort in grief. It gives you steps. I filed authorization forms, brought the death certificate, and spent a day in the credit union filling out signatures while the sun inched low. The ledger confirmed the payments, recurring charges, a final premium plan 2 days before Dad died. That simple phrase, premium, meant persistence, daily deliveries, priority. It pushed my suspicion into a quiet, hard certainty. Claire found receipts in his safe when she was sorting through boxes. She had the habit of folding receipts into neat stacks like origami. She kept one in her palm during arguments and smoothed it when she needed the world to be tidy. The ledger included a courier services charge on September 17th. The courier confirmed delivery to a P.O. box signed by M.A., and the package's contents, seed packets, a key, and a folded letter, stitched together the story I'd been tracing with my scratches on the yellow pad. I drove back to Maya because you only get answers when you knock the right doors. She was practical and unafraid of weather, the kind of person who keeps a porch light on and a thermos in case someone drops by. She showed me the Polaroids. Him, younger. Him watering her small patch of garden. Him squinting at a cheap radio he'd brought to fix. One Polaroid's back read, "For when I can't say it." His handwriting looked like someone trying to be formal while their hands shook. When we played the cassette together, he sounded, both nervous and resolved. He talked about trying to be brave, about the smallness of his assistants, about not wanting to complicate our lives. He was specific about the things he'd done. 300 wired to a small account, mail left with a friend, a roof repair paid in cash. All of it was both generous and cowardly in a single brushstroke. When the digital file labeled "For Maya" last played, he was almost tender. I didn't want to hurt them. I didn't want to make them carry my guilt. He paused mid-sentence and swallowed. The pause was a whole human curriculum. I asked Maya whether she'd ever gotten money or letters. She'd accepted things quietly. Her sister had used the funds to keep the lights on one long winter. The practical, small outcome changed the geometry of my anger. Seeing someone's heater start up because of my father's quiet payment is a kind of evidence that complicates moral certainty. I felt the soft sting of being simultaneously angry and grateful, which is one of those headaches grief teaches you to hold. There was a ledger in the safe with names and amounts. Claire crawled under the table light with a magnifying glass, the way people do when they want to amplify the fine print of a life. She cried, not for money, but because the ledger showed a man trying. The tears came because she imagined him making the transfers with the same clumsy hands that fixed our bikes, because she felt the brittle line of missed opportunities and the small, late attempts at repair. We had to make a decision about the digital archive. Claire wanted privacy. She wanted the thing to stay small because that smallness felt like respect. I didn't want to make a public shrine either. We compromised. Private family folder, copies for Maya's sister, the cassette archived, the scheduler canceled. I archived the files instead of deleting them because I didn't trust myself to be the arbiter of his life, and because archive felt less like an erasure and more like preservation. On a whim, during a late-night browse, I left a voicemail on his old line before I finally canceled the service. It was a childish thing. I needed to put my voice into the same space. Robson, I said, I found you. I'm trying to understand. The sound of my own voice echoed back at me from the kitchen walls like someone trying to fill a room. Aaron walked me through the cancellation. There was a prompt. Archive files? Cancel? I archived. It felt like closing a door without slamming it. The machine acknowledged the command with an indifferent beep. That's how most of this is. You argue with flesh and then press buttons on indifferent devices. Months pass the way months do when you have paperwork. A lot of small errands stitched together. Payments, calls, a counselor appointment Claire insisted on. We spoke to a counselor who helped us see my father's actions as an imperfect attempt at atonement rather than a tidy absolution. The counselor asked that I try to hold two truths. He had failed us by not being present, and he had tried, clumsily, to make amends. That was a hard lesson in nuance. Maya visited sometimes. Her porch light warmed the evenings when I went by with a bag of sunflower seeds, the same brand he used to buy. We talked about things like mail and small chores and the way people tolerate not knowing. It was in those small conversations that my father stopped being a single, simplified figure, either villain or saint, and became a messy, lived person, afraid of hospitals, careful with cash, clumsy at apologies. Claire and I wrote a short note to the church he had drifted through for a while. We asked for private remembrance, not headlines. A reporter called later, whispery and hungry for the secret benefactor with a twist. I said no. I refused to let our grief be the bright paper that folds into someone's column inches. Once, months later, an envelope with no return address arrived containing a single Polaroid and a tiny note in his hand. For Ethan, so you know he tried. I kept the photo in a small wooden box with the cassette and read the note when I needed to imagine him making a last, clumsy effort. It's not a clean forgiveness offered. It's a record that complicates feelings. Time doesn't heal in the neat way people like to tell you. It rearranges. The hard edges dull, and sometimes gratitude can sit beside anger without one swallowing the other. I replay his messages sometimes, on long drives when the radio is too loud, and I want something quieter. He's often foolish on the tapes, apologetic, embarrassed. He is a man who left behind little attempts instead of grand gestures, and learning to live with that is its own slow, daily work. The smell of peppermint and motor oil that lived in the pockets. Touch is where memory posts its receipts. A folded cuff, the thread worn thin where he always rubbed the inside of his wrist when he thought. I stood at that point because you asked for a touch/temperature opening, and the little details are the honest things. I drove to her house the week after a photograph arrived at our place, the one with him and Maya at a picnic. It unsettled me in a way a photo shouldn't. It was a clear proof, but it also felt like eavesdropping on a private thing. The drive back took longer than I expected because of construction and a slow truck that couldn't decide whether to pass. Gas money gets heavy when you're doing emotional archaeology on a tight budget. Maya opened the door and looked at me long enough to read my face before she let me inside. She poured coffee the way she poured care. Not too hot, always with a splash of milk. She had the habit of tucking hair behind her ear when she was thinking. I have the habit of checking my phone even when the battery's only at 40%, because that little digital tether still makes me feel like I have access to something stable. She handed me the letter he'd given her and set the cassette between us on the table. When she played his recorded voice, he sounded like a man trying to be brave in private. I didn't tell my kids, because I didn't want to hurt them, he said. I thought I could keep things small and not damage what we had. I was wrong. His voice broke on the last line, and then he laughed softly, as if embarrassed to be heard. That sound made the story harder to reduce. We ran the digital file next. It was the one labeled for Maya, last. He sounded more direct in the digital recording, the way people do when they speak into a microphone with an audience of silence. He admitted to wiring money and arranging a roof repair. He signed the things he'd done with apologies that read less like excuses and more like someone trying to catch up. Maya told me the package she'd received, the one the courier had signed for, went to her sister who lived in Florida. It had helped after her sister's car broke down. Her sister was younger than Maya and nervous, like people who'd been close to the end before. We met her at a diner with coffee-stained menus. She accepted the small help without drama and thanked my father in the quiet way of someone who doesn't expect anything and is surprised by mercy. The human moments there shifted my internal tally. In the ledger in my head, I had been scoring betrayals and kindnesses on two separate columns. Seeing a concrete result, the light stayed on, made reconciling easier. It didn't erase the secrecy, but math is stubborn. $300 is $300, and a fixed roof is a fixed roof. Claire and I fought again about whether to tell the wider family. She was worried about posthumous performance, rewriting a man's narrative to absolve him. She kept tapping her thumb against the envelope with the ledger, the way she does when she needs to think. He didn't ask to be judged, she said. He asked to be forgiven. We don't owe the world his redemption. I argued that truth matters. People can hold complexity, I told her. She didn't look convinced, but she let it stand. We landed in a compromise. We'd share the essentials with immediate family and with Maya's sister, but we wouldn't make a spectacle of it. The smallness of that agreement felt like what the man might have wanted, or at least what he would have approved of in principle. There were more arcane, necessary details, cataloging the audio files, creating transcripts, making sure the credit union had everything it needed for probate questions. Aaron walked me through the logs again and pointed out small things: an upload from an IP during one of Dad's late-night radio sessions, a manual call logged one afternoon, a payment that matched his ATM pattern. He tapped his fingers on the desk and explained things with the calm of someone who does not let emotion destabilize syntax. You can look at the machine's evidence, he said, but it won't tell you why he chose that route. That line has stayed with me. The machine tells you the how. People are needed for the why. In the months that followed, my anger softened into an uneasy gratitude. I saw parts of him I recognized. His fear of hospitals that made him avoid doctors. His tendency to do small fixes rather than big renovations. His awkwardness with apologies. Each one is a small human flaw, and also an honest descriptor of his life. Maya told me once, quietly, he said he was afraid to be a father because he didn't know how. That admission made sense in the same way a slow apology can make sense years after the fact. He'd been clumsy with love and tried to compensate in ways that saved a few people, but could never make up for a lifetime of absence. We did a small, private thing. Claire and I compiled a family folder and included copies of the messages and the letters for the people involved. We wrote a short note to the church group asking for prayers that included admission and mercy, not applause. It felt like the modest memorial he might have tolerated. A reporter called later, with the kind of voice that smells like a lead paragraph. I told them no. I said our family had chosen privacy. The reporter thanked me and hung up with a polite beep. The town kept moving. People still bought bread at the same bakery and mowed the same lawns. Sometimes, late at night, I take the cassette out and listen. He's foolish. He's embarrassed. He's sometimes unbearably tender. He's also my father, flawed and attempting. That mixture is what I've had to live with. I keep the archive not as an altar, but as a ledger of a complicated life. Payments and apologies, small repairs, and missed birthdays. I do not know if he was cowardly or kind. Those categories don't hold neatly. He was human. He was contradictory. He was someone who, late in life, decided to try wearing a small kind of courage. It didn't make everything right. It did, occasionally, make things better for strangers. Claire and I cook dinner on Sundays now. Small rituals, the kind he never kept. We talk about what to teach kids about kindness, that good does not erase harm, and that trying is not the same as repairing. We teach them both things, clumsily and honestly. It's the best we have. If this story moved you, subscribe for more real-life confessions and emotional journeys like this one.